Hey, what's up? It's Jesko again from AcousticsInsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. And I'm coming to you with a brand new video. I want to talk to you about studio speakers. Specifically, I want to talk to you about getting a second pair, or maybe even a third pair of studio speakers for your home studio. So you might be in a situation where you've got one pair set up, but you're having trouble kind of figuring out what's going on in the music. You're not sure what it is you're listening to. Your music doesn't really translate outside of the studio. And so you're thinking, maybe I should get this second pair, this other speaker set that I've been eyeballing on, I don't know, some shop on the internet maybe. And you're wondering, okay, is this a good idea? So that's what I want to talk to you about today. And the short of it is, probably not. So let's dive in. The first thing you want to consider, or the first thing you want to be aware of, is that you can really only get a proper stereo image, a proper sound stage from one set of speakers in a home studio typically, yeah? And that the reason is that there's usually not enough space for two sets of speakers of the same type. So for example, two sets of two-way near fields in the space to get a proper stereo image at your listening position, right? If you set up two speakers next to each other, or two sets of speakers next to each other, you'll have to compromise on both, on the placement of both sets in order to find kind of a middle ground that works for both sets at your listening position. And that means that neither of them will be properly set up to give you a proper phantom center, a proper stereo image, a proper sound stage, right? And if you've gone through my phantom speaker test to set up your speakers, you probably know just how detailed or just how kind of accurate you want to be when you're setting up your speakers, and how small changes can make a fairly big difference to what your stereo image and your sound stage that kind of opens up before you, in front of you, what that sounds like, right? So you just have to be aware that if you try and optimize for two sets of speakers, or three sets of speakers even, you won't be able to place either of them perfectly, right? And that, in my opinion, is a big compromise, because if you want to be able to tell what is going on in the sound stage, if you want to be able to tell where your layers are panned, if you want to really get the most out of a set of speakers, you really need to place them properly. And you can really only do that with one set in a home studio, okay? By the way, if you're wondering what this phantom speaker test is, I put a link in the description. It's my guide on how to set up speakers in a home studio. It's a simple structured listening test that walks you through figuring out the exact placement of your speakers in your studio. So again, check that out at the link in the description if you want to if you need help placing your speakers. So the second thing to be aware of is that speakers don't really perform properly, or only really perform best when there are no big objects or surfaces close by, okay? And so what do I mean by that? Well, ideally what you want is for your speakers to be kind of free floating in midair, okay? You don't want any surfaces, any objects in close proximity to your speakers, because what that will do is cause reflections to some extent, potentially, if you're talking about a surface. Potentially you're talking about transmitting energy into that second object and it radiating energy. So it messes with the radiation pattern of the speaker itself. And that shows up usually in terms of degraded frequency response, right? So you get some sort of reflection, some sort of energy that mixes in with what the speaker does on its own, and degrades the tonality, the frequency response of your speaker. I've seen this plenty of times when, first of all, when speakers are set up on desks directly, or even on those kind of shelves with rack space underneath that come with a lot of studio kind of mixing producer desks, right? It doesn't allow your speaker to perform optimally. Just setting up a speaker on one of those shelves in itself is already compromising the performance of the speaker. So yeah, so a speaker really wants to be in midair. And that's why a separate set of speaker stands is the ideal or the best we can do to get as close as possible to this kind of idea of a speaker floating in midair. Okay, so you don't want a speaker, if you get a second pair, you don't want a speaker to be touching another pair or another speaker right next to it. Yeah, it degrades the performance of both speakers. And again, you won't be getting the best out of either speaker set, right? So it's not a good idea in that sense either. But here's the most important aspect of why I don't think you should invest in a second set of speakers for your home studio. And this is less technical and more of an opinion and an experience thing from mixing for many, many years now. And that is that a second set of speakers of the same type, so in a home studio that means usually a second two-way near-field monitor set, won't tell you anything useful about your mix that your existing set doesn't already tell you. Okay? It gives you a slightly different perspective, but not very much, because it's the same type of speaker. It'll sound a little different because it's a different brand, it's slightly differently built, it's maybe slightly differently tuned or whatever, just slightly different size, but it's basically looking at the music through the same type of window. And that isn't particularly productive as part of your workflow. It's much more productive to get an insight into your music through a very different lens, a very different window, right? So what typically works in a home studio as a different window, as a different lens? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is a single driver mono speaker. So sometimes called a grot box, right? It's a small single driver speaker that focuses purely on the mid-range. Like I've got one here, it's broken right now, but I've got this Fostex, this small Fostex box, right? And I usually have that set up on the side somewhere out of the direct path of the speakers. It doesn't interact with my main speaker set. And this gives me a different view on the music, which gives me way more information about what is going on, right? And in two ways, this type of speaker is really great. On one side, because it removes the low end and the high end to some extent. So it's really mid-focused, and that's where the music lives, right? Mixing your mids, getting the balance of your layers of your instruments in the mids right is crucial to getting a powerful, loud mix. And on top of that, it obviously sums the left and right channels to mono, which again gives you a different perspective onto the music, right? So this is a very different window onto your music, onto what you're working on, and that will tell you a lot more than just getting a second set of two-way near fields. Okay, obviously, a good pair of headphones really helps. You could get a hi-fi system, a cheap hi-fi system, and put that up somewhere in your room. You could get a boombox. A lot of people just get like old school boomboxes or those kind of integrated stereo speaker thingies that people used to carry around on their shoulders. Yeah, and any of these will give you an angle, a view onto the music that helps you decide what is missing, what the mix needs, what is maybe too much, in a much more productive way. It is a much more productive tool as part of your workflow when you're mixing or producing. Okay, so those are the main reasons why I don't think you should invest in just a second set of speakers. Okay, it is actually in many ways detrimental to your main set if you get a second set of speakers, yeah, of the same type. So the way to think about this is that you want one main set which will allow you to do about, I don't know, 70-80% of the work that you do. And that is your main insight into the music. And then you'll have other sets of speakers or playback systems adjacent to your main set, not physically adjacent, but in terms of workflow, in terms of insight, that give you different angles into the music, right? And you got to experiment a bit about what kind of works there for you and what really makes sense for you as part of your workflow. Yeah, but if you're just thinking of just like setting up another pair and then thinking that will somehow help you get better translating mixes or kind of help you judge compression or space or whatever better, I highly doubt it. Yeah, I mean, it is sure you often see that in other studios, but I don't really know if any of these people really work the same amount on either set. I highly doubt it, to be honest. Sure, some people might make it work for them, but I think there are better ways that do not compromise your main system, right? Your main playback system, your main speaker set. And remember that if you need help setting up your one set, making sure that you're really getting everything out of that main speaker system, download my guide to the Phantom speaker test at the link in the description. Go through the steps that I outline in that guide to help you figure out where your speakers exactly need to go, how far apart they need to be, how far away from them you need to be, at what angle you need to be. It's a structured listening test that walks you through figuring out how to set up your set of speakers in your room to get that optimal stereo image, soundstage, and phantom center between your speakers so that you can reliably hear what is going on in the music. Okay, that's it for now. Let's remember to keep learning to trust our ears, get back to having fun working on music. I'll see you in the next one.